What's going on, y'all? I'm KM Best, and I'm here to talk about the best decks in Marvel Snap. The first deck that needs talking about is, of course, the Brood Absman mid-range deck. This deck looks to play Brood on turn 3 into Absorbing Man on turn 4 and create as many stats as it possibly can. It also has a lot of room for tech. We spent the last probably 10 minutes just fiddling around with different variations of this, playing it in different conquests. There are a lot of flex slots here. The Iron Man that I have in here can very easily be Blue Marvel. The armor can be something like Luke Cage or Spider-Ham. The Silver Surfer even can become Shang-Chi. Obviously, which cards you put in influences which cards you'll want in there as your additional flex slots. So, take it as it comes. You have to make sure, maybe you don't want to play armor and Shang-Chi. But the basic premise of this deck is actually pretty simple. Shang-Chi and Enchantress are very, very good. This deck puts the most stats on the board in the least vulnerable to those cards way. So you have Absorbing Man after a Brood for like 15. You have the potential for Iron Lad Broods for like 18. You Forge into a Brood for another 15. You're putting a ton of points on the board, but you're doing it a bit more horizontally than a deck normally would. Normally a deck might go vertical with one of those cards. Instead, you're doing it horizontally, dodging Shang-Chi. That is the main thing that this deck is attempting to do. Now, it goes without saying that you can include something like Shang-Chi in here, but that will make you a little bit worse in the mirror. Why have I opted for armor? Well, that's because you're actually a pretty significant underdog to the Deadpool list. You're going to end up in some bad situations against it because it can go so much taller than you and can dodge Shang-Chi pretty easily. For this reason, I have the armor in here, so hopefully you can shut them down before they get going. Armor's a little better than Cosmo at doing this, because this list isn't going to take priority early, meaning they're usually going to get a turn 3 destroy off if they want it, and that is usually how that deck plays out. X-23 or Deadpool into something else, into Kaboom. And if you can't prevent that from happening, then you end up in a lot of trouble as they start snowballing forward. Next up is the other mid-range shell that dodges Shang-Chi and sometimes uses him, and this is, of course, the Electric Slide, aka Silky Smooth, aka the deck that was the best deck before that Brood Absman deck showed up. The issue this deck has is it is just really bad into Brood Absman. It's pretty good into basically everything else, but it is very, very bad into Brood Absman. It's a little more flexible. There's a little more skill expression. You can really get things done by knowing how your deck works with this more than you can with other variations of this concept. But fundamentally, it's doing a similar thing to the Brood Absman deck, which is staying under Shang-Chi while putting out a lot of power. But it does it a little bit worse. The Brood Absman deck draws better and has more high rolls and generally wins the heads up. Other than that matchup, you have a lot of solid ones. You can, of course, tech an armor in here for the Deadpool list if that's something you end up seeing a lot. They are quite powerful, those lists, so do keep that in mind. This deck isn't dead, but the existence of Brood Absman means that it has a new and very, very significant bad matchup. I've talked a lot about Deadpool today, and I think that you deserve an explanation as to why. This deck is the deck that is best at going really tall over the Brood Absman deck while dodging Shang-Chi and Enchantress because all your power is in your hand. You're looking for, say, a turn 6 Null plus Deadpool thanks to X-23 energy. You're looking for something along the lines of a Deadpool Taskmaster to just go as vertical as you can while not having priority, allowing you to dodge Shang-Chi that way. That is the ethos that this deck operates on, and it high rolls quite well, thanks to now having additionally X-23 in addition to Deadpool as a significant early card that they can play. They get a lot of advantage out of this stuff, although when you're playing it, you do need to keep in mind when you need your energy to pop. In addition, you're going to have to keep priority in mind, because the main thing this deck does is go vertical while throwing priority. Go vertical while throw priority, dodge Shang-Chi. But you have to be a little cautious, because there are situations where, like, okay, let's say you have a big Deadpool and a Venom. Sometimes it's going to be better to not eat that Deadpool if it's going to give you priority and open you up to a Shangers. that will and can happen, and you do need to be aware of those situations. Another list that is looking simply to go super tall while throwing priority is, of course, Kitty Shuri. It dodges Shang-Chi in much the same way the Deadpool list does, so your goal here is you play a Kitty Pryde, you forge the Kitty Pryde, you Hulkbuster the Kitty Pryde, you Shuri the Kitty Pryde, and then you Taskmaster the Kitty Pryde. Now, one card that is a big problem for this list a decent amount of the time, and also a problem for the Deadpool list, is Spider-Ham, because obviously if your Taskmaster gets Spider-Ham, you're in just a world of hurt, and you are a little bit more likely to have it in your hand whenever they play it, because you are an America Chavez deck, you have less ability to top deck out of doing that, so we do have a sort of alternative plan here, which is, of course, just you play Shuri into Red Skull. It's very, very large. I'm not 100% sold on the Red Skull, personally. I think that is... I'm not a big fan of Red Skull, but look, sometimes he's very big, and sometimes you need something that's very big, and that's just going to have to be enough. You aren't always going to open on Kitty Pryde. You aren't always going to have Kitty, Forge, Hulkbuster. It's not always going to line up. Sometimes you just need to brute force it, and Red Skull is sort of a solid backup plan in those cases. Rounding out this tier is She-Not, a deck I just generally don't respect a lot, but you need to be aware of. I probably wouldn't play it due to the preponderance of Legion in the meta, but it is something that you will run up against. It is pretty good, and even Legion existing is not enough to make it completely terrible. Frankly, if Legion didn't exist, I would say this might be a contender for the best deck in the game. But Legion does exist, keeps it under control pretty significantly. You'll notice Legion was maybe one of the most played cards across the decks we've already talked about here. It is no surprise that a deck that has a weakness to him is a little bit iffy. That said, it's not an out-and-out weakness. It's more of a guessing game weakness. You know, if you think they're going to Legion, you can usually do plays that beat it, but it's very much, you know, what will they do? What will I do? I've noticed whenever people have the Legion, they tend to go for it, so do keep that in mind. See if you can get a read off of their snaps based on that. People love doing the Legion scam on you, maybe a little bit more than they should, myself included. I do not know what Thanos deck should be on this tier list. I have absolutely no idea. There are so many different options for what Thanos deck this should be, and you pretty much just pick a sub-theme and you pick Thanos and you go with it. I have had Move Thanos featured here. I have had Destroy Thanos featured here. I have seen an ongoing list flying around and everything like that. There are so many options that you have at this spot. Thanos is always going to be a completely fine choice, and I find absolutely nothing wrong with you choosing to play him, you choosing to find the best Thanos deck. At any given time, you could convince me Thanos is the best deck in the metagame, and people just haven't found it yet. This list specifically, I think, is pretty solid. It's like a little bit more of a sane version of the Lady Deathstrike thing that I was doing earlier. I'm a big Thanos Galactus fan right now. I think Thanos Galactus is pretty specifically something that got buffed by X23, and that kind of juke is usually pretty solid. There's another version flying around with, of course, Shuri Nimrod. Thanos, there's just sort of infinite options with. And I just wanted to say, I know there's a good Thanos list here. I'm not sure this is it. It looks pretty promising. I would encourage experimentation when it comes to Thanos. Finally, we're diving into Tier 2, which is decks I really wouldn't recommend, but I wanted to put on the list just so people knew they were options, right? What I have here is a Sarah list that I used pretty recently to get a solid 3-0 Gold Conquest Infinity ticket. It was better than I thought it would be. It obviously has some bad matchups, right? Like, there are bad matchups like Brute Absman's a bad matchup. The Move deck is a bad matchup. But, I mean, honestly, I haven't seen a ton of those in the higher conquests recently, so you might actually be able to get away with it. So this is a deck that is built on reactive tools. Remember how I talked about how basically every single deck is looking to be something that is avoiding Shang-Chi and Enchantress? Well, this is the deck that is playing Shang-Chi and Enchantress. And, you know, it's probably doing a little bit worse of a job of it than Darkhawk, but honestly, they're both not something I'd be wanting to do right now. Being the Shang-Chi Enchantress deck in a sea of people playing to beat Shang-Chi and Enchantress is just not really my bag. Darkhawk suffers from the same problems as Sarah. It's a deck that relies on A, drawing Zabu, which doesn't always happen, and B, making sure that you're ahead enough in order to capitalize on Shang-Chi and Enchantress, or perhaps I should say behind enough in order to capitalize on Shang-Chi and Enchantress. The issue is, as we've discussed, a lot of the top decks right now are built to beat what you do. It's not unbeatable. When people talk about these matchups like it's unbeatable, it's not unbeatable. It's just, favored, right? And so you need to rely on your other tools, things like Spider-Ham, things like Jeff, things like Legion. That'll make it a little bit more likely for you to be able to pull off what you want to pull off. I think the existence of so many decks that counter what you normally want to do has pushed me away from America Chavez in this archetype personally, because your A game is you need to introduce variance into those situations. You need to get lucky. You're not going to beat them if both of you are doing what both of you want to do. So you need to introduce some variance, get a little lucky, capitalize on that luck. And luckily, Snap has the Snap system where it's built to do that. You can play along those lines. I hope you enjoyed this look at the tier list. Thank you so much for everyone watching. As always, I've been KM Best. I should note I'm still not home, but I will be soon. Thank you so much to everyone who's sticking with me while I attempt to make it home from Hong Kong. Thank you. I have been KM Best. If you think I missed something, leave it in the comments below. I really appreciate it. Y'all have a good one.